following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back talking sports in the zone. I'm Ralph Tycho with the usual Jeff Kallman on a Saturday. It's Sunday today.
And here I thought I was unusual.
We suspended it a day, but we're back at you talking sports, and we talk baseball mostly. We have the most interesting topic to talk about, the most interesting, most fascinating human being that in sports, in baseball, could be in the world. He is Mr. Branch Rickey, and we've got a lot to talk about today, Jeff.
You could pick any one of 6 or 7 subjects contiguous to Branch Rickey and make a single show out of it, actually.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We won't be doing that, but with that in mind, let's start at the beginning of his career, and I think there's a story in there that shapes the man and tells you why someday there would be a Jackie Robinson.
I know the story very well.
I know you do, and I'd love to hear
as
you
a college, as an Ohio Wesleyan University baseball coach and team manager, Rickey had a black catcher. The name escapes me for the moment, but when he was checking them into a hotel on a visit to play another school, the hotel tried to stop Rickey from checking him in because their policy was not to admit blacks. Rickey finally persuaded them something along the line of, well, can we put a cot in my room and he can sleep in my room? Would that be okay? And the desk people gave in to that. Well, a few moments later, Rickey was getting things set up, and he saw this young man who he admired crying and pulling at his skin, saying to him, "It's my skin, Mr. Rickey. If I could change my skin, everything would be okay," or some such thing. "It's my skin, Mr. Rickey." It was a sight that Rickey never forgot. And he had in mind from that
point for the rest of his life.
Or at least until he could find a way to integrate Major League Baseball and organized baseball. As long as Kennesaw Mountain Landis was alive, he knew he wouldn't have the chance. But when Landis passed away in the mid-1940s, Rickey started making plans. Now, there had never been a formal ban against black players. It was de facto, but everyone in baseball knew that as long as Landis was alive and running the game, it would never happen.
Mm-hmm. Now let's go back to those early years, and where did his college career take him? If I'm not mistaken, it's the St. Louis Browns.
It was the Browns indeed. He played his Major League Baseball with the Browns. I believe Rickey was a Brown from 1905 and 1906. Then he played the 1907 season with the New York Highlanders, who became the Yankees. And then one more time in 1914, he put himself on the field with the Browns, by which time he'd become their manager. He managed them from 1913 to 1915. At the same time, he was their general manager. And then he moved to the Cardinals in 1919. He managed the team and was their general manager through 1925, after which he was strictly their team president. And it is in there that we begin as well to find the real Branch Rickey, not just with what happened to set him toward integrating baseball when he was at Ohio Wesleyan, but while he was with the Cardinals is when the Branch Rickey of legend really began coming into place.
Didn't he bring in the farm system at that time?
He created the farm system while he was running the Cardinals. And he said at the time, and it was certainly true, and it still is, to a lot of extent even today, that building the farm system would enable teams who did not have the resources of the league powerhouses to compete.
Mm-hmm.
Because with all the farm teams, and at one time the Cardinals, I think, had 32 farms at various levels under Rickey. You would have a whole stockpile of players, and you were liable to find some solid major leaguers out of that stockpile.
Right, and all those guys, Pepper Martin and all that, he brought them up, the Gas House Gang. Am I correct?
He brought the Gas House Gang. He was putting the farm system in place, and it really solidified between 1930 and 1934. Now, the kicker here is that Landis feared Rickey would ruin the game with his farm system. Twice, Landis released at least 70 Cardinals minor league players. But he couldn't stop the farm system because other teams began adopting it in various ways and to various extents. So to the extent that we still have the farm system in professional baseball, that is one of Branch Rickey's legacies.
All right. And not to say that he wasn't successful at the bottom line of winning in St. Louis as well.
He did win in St. Louis. He won their third World Series title with the 1934 team. That was mostly a product of the farm system. And in his final year in St. Louis, the Cardinals had their best season ever as a franchise to that point. They won 106 games, and they won the World Series. And the core of that team was from the Rickey farm: Enos Slaughter, Stan Musial, Marty Marion, and even their manager, Billy Southworth.
Oh, right. An old Cardinal at that. How did it come to be that he got away from the Cardinals and went to the Dodgers?
Well, he eventually alienated himself from Cardinals owner Sam Breeden. And he happened to be a friend of Larry McPhail, who was running the Dodgers in 1942. And McPhail enlisted in the Army to serve in World War II, so the Dodgers hired Rickey to replace him as president and GM. And in 1945, the Dodgers reorganized their ownership, and Rickey became a 25% owner of the Dodgers as well.
Oh, wow. So at one time or another, he sold out to O'Malley.
O'Malley wanted to force him out. Rickey didn't make it easy for him. There was, if I remember from reading right, there was a clause in Rickey's deal with the Dodgers that if O'Malley wanted him out, O'Malley had to match the price of Rickey's stock. O'Malley was fool enough to think that Rickey could not find anyone to buy, but he found a buyer. And when he found that buyer, O'Malley had to match that price to buy Rickey out. The buyer was New York builder William Zeckendorf.
Ah, okay.
Now, obviously, Zeckendorf didn't buy Rickey's stock, but when Zeckendorf named the price and Rickey brought that to O'Malley, O'Malley had no choice. Either pay that price or Rickey could beat him out.
Right, which wouldn't necessarily happen because he was one of the biggest New York developers going at that time.
Oh, Zeckendorf at that time had money to burn.
Yes.
He could well afford to make even a token offer for Branch Rickey's Dodger stock just to help Rickey make O'Malley squirm a little bit.
Okay, I want to.
So if he wanted to buy, he could have.
Right, he could have ended up buying the Dodgers.
And it was with the Dodgers that Rickey did something that I think was even more innovative than the farm system, and at least equal to what he did bringing Jackie Robinson to the Dodgers. There's no question that Robinson coming to the Dodgers is Branch Rickey's signature achievement. To this day, when you say the name Branch Rickey, the next name to be mentioned will be Jackie Robinson, and rightfully so. But he did something else while he was in Brooklyn.
Well, he did develop a training system for spring
More
training.
than that. He built the first permanent spring training camp. He built Vero Beach.
Right, but he had these cages and these weights, and
he had batting cages. He had a system of weights. He had sliding boxes to teach for teaching base running. He had the once famous pitching strings where pitchers could throw through them, shaped like a strike zone, and it was a little bit easier to analyze what their pitches were or weren't doing and how they could work with them. But he did something else in 1947 that people didn't realize at the time, while they were laughing at the idea, was going to have at least as big an impact on the game as integration did.
What was that?
Branch Rickey can be argued as the father of what we now call sabermetrics because of a man he hired named Alan Roth in 1947.
We've talked briefly about that. Alan Roth.
We've mentioned it in passing.
Statistician, but I cannot equate the importance of sabermetrics and even stats beyond batting average and RBIs to the importance of bringing Jackie in. Are you kidding? You're breaking up.
And no question about it, it blew the talent pool wide open for everybody. It not only redressed a terrible wrong, but it opened up baseball's talent pool irrevocably.
Right. And
it took a while for the whole major league to get in on it. It took a while for all the other teams to begin integrating, but integrate they did, and it changed the makeup of the game.
Absolutely. It's singularly the most important thing to happen, certainly in our lifetimes. And I was born before integration. I was born in 1946. So it's really... you were too, did you say? You are breaking up, sir.
Oh, I wasn't alive when Rickey brought Robinson up.
Okay. How you were born at that time?
I was born in 1955. I was born a month after the Dodgers won their only Brooklyn World Series.
Boy, I remember that day, as a matter of fact. And I remember being 10 years old and having an argument with my classmate, Neil Silver, who was an avid Dodger fan, and I had no horse in the race, being a Giant fan, and it didn't matter to me at all. But I did say to Neil Silver that morning when Tommy Byrne was going to go against Johnny Padres later on in the day, I said, Neil, who's the world champion right now? Right now, this moment. And he said, oh, yeah, it's the Giants. Just remember that. Hold that thought, Neil. We were both 10, and that was right now, I knew tomorrow it wouldn't be the Giants as world champions. But I'll tell you what, that's how important baseball was. We would debate, we would interact, we would argue, we would just enjoy it more than talking about anything else. And it was a New York way of doing it. We had the Giant fans, the Dodger fans, the Yankee fans, and we meet on the corner and just wait for the newspaper to come in. The Daily News would have early editions, and we talk ball. It was good times growing up, Jackson Heights, New York. Where did you grow up? I forgot.
Well, I grew up first in Kingsbridge in the North Bronx, and then in Long Beach on Long Island.
Well, I'll tell you what, the next station on the D train from Kingsbridge was Bedford Park. Am I correct?
That's right, going north.
Right, going north. And
going
my
south, the next station was Fordham Road.
Right. Oh, that's right. That's right. Going the other way was Fordham. And My grandparents lived on Valentine Avenue off Bedford, off the station right there, right by the Bronx Zoo, or the Botanical Gardens, I guess were close. I miss those days, and I miss those people who helped raise me, Phil and Rose Niss from the Bronx. So let's. What I wanted to ask you about before we get into more of Branch, what he did on the field, I wanted to have you talk about his, let's just say, eclectic personality.
Oh, Rickey was a contradiction in many ways. On the one hand, he was deeply religious, and on the other hand, he was notoriously penurious.
Right. Okay. Now you're using that word, and that threw me.
Cheap.
Oh, okay. Well, that I know. He was known for being. But you know, there are some Dodgers, not Clem LeBon, but Carl Erskine. We talked to him once in an interview, and he discounts that. So I think it was a matter of he treated players differently, not necessarily equally.
He did treat players individually. There's no question about that. But if you were to read the press of the time, you got several views of Branch Rickey. There were those who respected Rickey as an innovator. There were those who respected him for the way he could run a baseball team. And there were those who denigrated him because he did have a penchant for putting things somewhat excessively into biblical terms. And he was also roasted because of a perception that he was a cheapskate.
Right.
Ralph Kiner was on the Pirates when Rickey took over running the Pirates, and Kiner and Rickey had their run-ins over salary negotiations to the point where in later life, Ralph Kiner said that Branch Rickey was the man most responsible for the final formation and solidification of the Major League Baseball Players Association.
Oh. Very interesting.
So we're talking about a man who I guess you could put it politely, was seen as a genius and a nut at the same time.
That's why I say an eclectic personality.
There are those from those years who would have said you were being polite. Jimmy Powers in the Daily News nicknamed him El Tipo.
Okay, tell me a little bit about the book that you told me you read by one of my, and I didn't even know it existed, and I'm going to order it on eBay.
It was
by Jimmy Breslin.
It was one of his last books.
What did you glean from that book?
It's really not that difficult to glean. The book is called Branch Rickey Alive, and it's Breslin's impression of Rickey mostly through the eyes of the Jackie Robinson experience. Breslin doesn't talk all that much about other parts of Rickey's career other than to speak a little about the years around Cardinals, acting the Pirates, and things like that.
Okay.
He focuses mostly on what Rickey meant baseball's integration.
Would you say that he did
Breslin's take on it, Breslin's take on that is fascinating read.
Okay, I will definitely look for that in the mail because I'm going to order that post haste. Would you say that he did the Jackie Robinson trip all from his heart, or a lot of it was what could this bring to the Dodgers?
I think it's no question he thought both ways, and very sincerely. He was just as sincere about Robinson as a person as well as a player as he was in believing that Robinson would mean the Dodgers continuing to win.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Leo Grosser had a more crass view of it in a way. When the infamous petition against Robinson circulated in spring 1947, DeRocher was one of the people who stopped it. And it said that he told his players, anybody who didn't want Robinson, he thought they were a fool, and he said, I say he's going to make us rich.
This is DeRocher.
Yeah. A few years later, Dressen, talking to Roger Kahn for the New York Herald Tribune, said, I know about the Klan. I know there's a lot of people here that like Robinson, but we're going to win the pennant with him, and when they see that Robinson's getting them that World Series dough, he's going to look awful white, awful fast. And that was in 1952.
Wow.
So it's definitely certain that the Dodgers went through growing pains with integration, even though they were the first team to do it, and that by 1952 they had several black players on the team.
You know, it's interesting to me and how people grow and change over a lifetime. Bobby Bragan was amongst those who, at least initially, fought very hard for Jackie not being on the team. And later on,
he went right to Rickey and said as much. And when Rickey told him he appreciated Bragan's candor, that started, according to Bragan, a great relationship between himself and Rickey, to the point where he stayed with him, even though he agreed to trade him, but he never did. And in time, Bragan had his own change of heart. I've seen Bragan quoted in several places.
He helped develop as a minor league coach, indoor manager. He
developed a lot of black players.
He developed Maury Wills, as a matter of fact. Maury Wills had been a 9-year minor league veteran who couldn't.
Do you know the one thing Bragan did for him? Do you know the one thing Bragan did above all?
Taught him to switch hit.
Switch hitting. He convinced Wills that he could switch hit.
Yeah.
That was his number one thing with him. He got guys like Lee May and Mac Jones to become major leaguers. Remember, both those guys were the Braves in the early 50s.
Right, and they were.
And he had a game-wide reputation for helping black players. And Bragan said to the day he died that if he hadn't had the experience he had with Jackie Robinson, he couldn't have done it.
Wow. It so transcends baseball, what he did. It just, it's humanity and the best and the worst of humanity shown vividly, shown themselves to be what they are vividly. There was no in between. It wasn't something
for a very long time. There wasn't, unfortunately. I mean, it did not have to be as difficult for Robinson as it was, but that was fortunately the way it had to be at that time. But the fact that he did it, and the fact that Rickey didn't waver in supporting him, tells you a great deal. I saw a story about Rickey once upon a time. I forget who told it off the top of my head. But do you remember the sportscaster Art Russ Jr.?
I certainly do. He had a call-in. He had one of the early call-in talk shows.
And he did that show for many years.
That kind of inspired me to do this silly little podcast deal.
Yeah. Well, in the early 40s, not long after Rickey took over the Dodgers, he was accosted on the street by a very young Art Russ Jr., loved baseball dearly, but not have been unaware that all people he rooted for in major leagues were white. He asked Rickey point blank, there was black blood in the major leagues. He said to him,
move around a little bit. Jeff, you're breaking up. Move around a little bit.
And anyway, Russ asked Rickey if he had black playing in the major leagues. And Rickey.
Okay, hey, everybody, we're gonna take a break. You're gonna call back, and let's get a better connect. But
Right.
we need to do that anyway. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho, the weak link of it all, but Jeff Kallman is here to bring us up to where we should be. We'll be back in a minute. We are back. A better connect with Mr. Kallman. I'm Ralph Tycho, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Here we go. Jeff, free.
All right. Anyway, as I was starting to say before the breakup, Art Rose Jr. was a not so young boy who ran into Branch Rickey on the street not long after Rickey took on the Dodgers. And he asked Rickey point blank, would we ever see a black man playing Major League Baseball? And Rickey is said to have replied, young man, you are going to live to see it happen.
Whoa.
So Rickey definitely had integration on his mind almost from the word go.
Yeah. Hey, you know what gets me? They made this, I don't know if it was a complete movie or a television documentary. It was really well done. It was 42, the story of all of that. And they
that was a theatrical film.
A theatrical film, and they portrayed the glider, Ed Charles, of the later of the Mets in his career, came up with the A's, as a matter of fact, when they were still in Kansas City, was a mentor to Skip Lockwood of this network when Skip Lockwood played as a position player in the A's organization. So it's a small baseball world, but they portrayed Ed running after the train that carried Jackie when he was barnstorming through Florida, through the South. And,
oh, yeah.
Charles
talked about that a lot.
Yeah, it served to open a world to a generation that would not, the people like Henry Aaron and Willie Mays, Frank Robinson, and the list goes on and on and on. And I should have said Larry Doby because he missed being number one.
But he was the Jackie Robinson of the American League.
He was indeed, and Bill Veeck was the Branch Rickey of the American League.
Bill Veeck may have had in mind integration on his own as well before 1947-48. It's long been suspected, and I don't know for sure myself, but I would not have been shocked to discover finally that it was true. But it's been suspected that Bill Veeck had a plan to buy the Phillies in the early 40s and then remake the team with black players, and that he may have been blocked from buying the team because of that. If it's a true story, I hope so, because
it was not
it would,
a progressive city.
Not even as late as 1964.
Not even as late as last Thursday, as a matter of fact, but that's another story. It wouldn't have been Philadelphia, but it very well was Cleveland, and I give Mr. Veeck a lot of credit.
Larry Doby and then Satchel Paige.
Yes.
I still remember getting a laugh reading whatever Casey Stengel saw Page warming up in the bullpen for the Indians or the Browns, he would hector his men on the bench, get the runs now, Father Time is coming.
Very good. Very good. All right, let's talk about Pittsburgh and then St. Louis and the Branch Rickey saga.
Well, in Pittsburgh, Rickey, I think, is a little bit underrated. The Pirates were moribund in those years, other than Ralph Kiner. He was the number one reason fans had to go to Forbes Field to watch the Pirates play, and the number one reason they had to stick around to the end of the game in the event that he hit one out. Rickey is not much appreciated today for this, but Rickey built the foundation of the Pirates' 1960 World Series winner.
No question, from signing Dick Groat on down the road and taking Roberto Clemente out of the Dodger organization.
Clemente out of the Dodger organization. He signed Dick Groat, Bill Mazeroski, Vernon Law, and Elroy Face.
Bob Friend.
Yeah, those players were the nucleus of that 1960 team. The rest of it was put together after Rickey left the Pirates. Joe Brown made the trades that completed the team, but the foundation was laid by Branch Rickey.
Right. After he left the Pirates, he did two very significant things. The Continental League.
Yeah, he was in on that from the beginning. The league was Bill Shea's idea in New York, but Rickey became the league's president, and Rickey became the face of the league for the most part when they made their challenge to Major League Baseball. Now, the league, of course, existed only on paper and died on paper, but it speeded up baseball's expansion. There are historians now who believe that baseball was likely to expand later in the 1960s. The Continental League made sure it happened sooner.
It also took the Giants and Dodgers out of New York.
No, the Continental League came after that. The Dodgers and the Giants.
Oh, I'm sorry. It brought back the Mets. Ended up being responsible for bringing back the Mets.
Well, what became the Mets and the Houston Club originated with the Continental League. A former Giant stockholder named Joan Payson was the owner of the Continental League's New York franchise, and when the Continental League folded and the National League agreed to award new teams to New York and Houston, Joan Payson was awarded the franchise. And Judge Roy Hofheinz was awarded the Houston franchise.
Yes. And they both went in different directions. Yes. The Mets going with veterans, Houston going with new guys.
Well, they had a compelling reason to do so. Houston was still not smarting over the memory of major league teams leaving the city. New York was. And the Mets Brain Trust, quite properly, thought the smart thing to do would be to put a major league team on the field that consisted mostly of veterans who would be recognizable to National League fans while they built a farm and built an organization. The Astros didn't have that problem facing them, so they could go with more unknown players. They had a few veterans too, don't get me wrong, but they did not have to worry about name recognition the way New York did, which was still in the wake of the Dodgers and the Giants leaving. In fact, if you want to see
here's what's very interesting to me, Jeff, is that as bad as the Mets did in those early years, and God knows they did bad, and God knows I did not like it. I was one of those Mets fans. It was fun for the first 15 minutes of losing. After that, throw it.
Well, it was fun for the entire 2 years they were in the Polo Grounds. I mean, other bad teams have sucked. The Mets sucked with style
and class, and they did it well. Let's put it that way.
They were
suck.
They were baseball's traveling circus. Figuratively speaking, they had Abbott pitching to Costello, the four Marx brothers in the infield, the Three Stooges in the outfield, the Harlem Globetrotters on the bench, and the Keystone Cops in the bullpen.
That's beautiful.
That was the 1962-63 Mets. They sucked with style.
That is beautiful. Very, very well said. Your writings can be found, incidentally, on your award-winning blog. I think your mom said it was great.
I've won the booby prize.
Okay.
I've won the no prize.
Hey,
the no
Pete
prize.
Jeff, you won it twice. You're talking to me, but that's another story. That's another story. My interesting point about all we said about the Mets in Houston, as bad as the Mets were in those early years, 1969, they won a world championship. So
indeed,
and Houston didn't win a world championship for many, 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 many years after that. So who knows? The baseball world is a rocky one, but an interesting one and a fun one. And to be a Met fan today,
I was going to say that anybody who would like to read about the Continental League would be well advised to pick up Michael Shapiro's book, Bottom of the Ninth, Branch Rickey, Casey Stengel, and the Daring Scheme to Save Baseball from Itself. It tells the entire story of the Continental League, its origin, its epilogue, and it's all hooked around the 1960 World Series.
Oh.
But the inside story of the Continental League itself is told very well by Shapiro, who you may remember wrote a terrific book about the last Dodgers pennant race in Brooklyn called The Last Good Season.
Ah, and that was 1957.
56.
Oh, well,
they won the
race.
they won the
pennant.
pennant, but they didn't win the World Series. And in 57, the team started aging.
They started aging, and they were unwilling, as were the Giants, to bring up any of their young talent that could have helped them. I think they wanted out of New York. That was basically
at the time, remember, the Giants announced their move first. They were going
to Minneapolis.
That they were going to go to. At first, they had the rights to Minneapolis. They had their top farm team there, but they waited. They said they were leaving New York. They waited for their destination until they realized that Walter O'Malley was going to go to California, and that the only thing lacking for him out there was competition. So he convinced Horace Stoneham to move to San Francisco.
Absolutely.
And they could continue the rivalry out there. Without another team on the West Coast, the Dodgers would have had numerous issues, logistic and otherwise.
It was okay to kill the spirit of a borough and really a city, but in particular, Brooklyn just never was the same. It was just a horrible thing to do. And
I'm surprised over all these years that Robert Moses has not yet been burned in effigy over it.
Well, there are those that say that Robert Moses had nothing to do with it, or
they're lying.
There were others. We'll save that for another podcast. Jeff, this is terrific. Keep coming back. And to be continued with Jeff Kallman. I'm Ralph Tycho, Comfortably Zone Network. I'll end the podcast the way I generally end my podcasts. I will implore everybody to keep your humor wet, your humor wet, your humor dry, your dreams wet, your kids out of military recruiting stations. Keep them away and keep them off the laps of clerics wearing dresses. It'll be a much better day for everybody. Trust me. We'll be back at you as soon as we can. Thank you again, Jeff.
You're welcome.
All right. Adios.
Hasta la pasta.